This is The Lucky Exile, a podcast shining a light on the emerging movement of integrated healthcare through conversations with the professionals in and around the healthcare field. Listen in as we dig deeper into caring for the whole human, body, mind, and spirit. Welcome your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Britton Kirschner.
Welcome back to The Lucky Exile. I'm your host, Britton Kirschner, and today we have a guest who inspired the very name of this podcast, Dr. Richard Schwartz, the creator of the therapy model Internal Family Systems. If you're familiar with Internal Family Systems, or IFS for short, you're aware that an exiled part of self is one that has been amputated as a result of past contamination from an unbearable experience or trauma. The sad reality is that we can go an entire lifetime surviving in these disconnected states from precious exiled parts of ourselves. Thus the name, The Lucky Exile, which refers to an exile that gets to come home. In the 1980s, Dr. Schwartz discovered an internal world with its own set of rules and a life of its own. It's in this world that so many have found healing and serenity from suffering that otherwise would have continued to hold them in this fractured state of survival. IFS is now evidence-based and has become widely used as a form of psychotherapy, particularly with trauma. It provides a non-pathologizing, optimistic, and empowering perspective and a practical and effective set of techniques for working with individuals, couples, families, and more recently, corporations and classrooms. This is going to be a great episode, so stay tuned. I am honored to have our guest here today, Dr. Richard Schwartz, who developed the Internal Family Systems model, and he's going to be talking with us today. So we're so glad to have him on the show. Do you prefer to go by Richard, by Dick? What do you prefer?
Dick is good.
Okay, very good. I wanted to do things a little bit differently. I've been for a while watching YouTube videos and podcast interviews that you've done, and you've done such a great job speaking and really being so engaged in the community with growing your model, with answering questions. And one thing I noticed, though, is a lot of the interviews did a great job covering some of the basic tenets of IFS or what IFS is. And so if you are somebody listening and don't know about that, there are so many great places to find that. I mean, first, I would direct you to the Internal Family Systems therapy website, which I'll have in the show notes below, but to learn just about maybe some of the basic things about IFS. But today, I wanted to see if we could dive into some deeper things as well, since a lot of the basic things have been covered. And to do so a little bit differently, I wanted to see if we could maybe do kind of a fun game. We've got a list of questions here. Dick, if you're okay with that, I wanted to let you pick the category, and then I would do kind of a random selection of a question from that category. So again, the categories that we have some of our serious questions that dive into some of the nuances. We've got some far out there questions that are more some meta thinking. We've got some questions that are just absolute nonsense that hopefully we can have some fun with, and maybe some getting to know you questions as well. As we get started, any of those categories sound interesting to you to start off with?
Maybe the getting to know you.
I like that. Okay, well, let me see here. Let me do my random number generator. We've got quite a few questions here, and it's coming up with number 5. Okay, so this question is, if you were not doing this work with internal family systems, this work as a therapist, as a researcher, what would you be doing instead? What's the alternate career path for you?
Well, I feel like I'm one of those totally lucky people, speaking of lucky exile, that found what I'm designed to do and that it's about the only thing I'm good at. I was a decent athlete, but I had a pretty good dose of ADHD, I think, and I'm just not that good at most other things, or not that interested either. So if I had to pick something, I really couldn't. I mean, I'm just blessed that there is one thing that I'm really good at, and I found it and I do it well.
The journey, I'm sure, to get to that level of insight connection, either with working with your own parts, developing that system, which we can get to a little bit later, kind of seems like you caught lightning in a bottle is almost what it feels like with this theory. But yeah, it'd be hard to imagine something else. So want to go with the same category? You want to switch it up? What do you think?
Why don't you pick one?
Okay. I'm going to go with, have you seen the movie Inside Out?
Yeah.
Do you feel like they owe you a royalty check?
No, I can't remember the story behind that movie, but I didn't have anything to do with it. And I doubt that they borrowed material from me. And we did reach out to them afterwards. If they do a sequel, I hope they'll call on us because was fabulous in terms of portraying parts, but there really wasn't any self in the system. And it would be great if they could add that for the sequel.
Yeah, I remember being in theaters watching that when it came out, and the therapist in me just wanted to jump up in the middle of the theater like a crazy person and be like, this is parts work. And, everybody else would have just looked at me like, okay, this is why therapists can be a little odd. But yeah, it was really fun seeing that. And I feel like a lot of people are coming to similar conclusions, though, with the multiplicity of self and getting to that.
Yeah, I think that movie and a few other things have impacted the culture such that there's more openness to the concept of multiplicity. And that's really helped IFS become as popular as it is now.
Yeah. Here's kind of a more serious question to throw in there. With this podcast, this really started out with wanting to develop the concept of team-based medicine and a multidisciplinary approach. I have gotten to see that firsthand with loved ones. I've seen that for clients of what it looks like when a team comes together with different specialties. And it just got me thinking, whether it be within a medical setting or something like that, how much IFS could benefit the patient experience, the precision of medical care, all of that process. Are there things already in the works with that where IFS has already been influencing healthcare?
Yes and no. Our big outcome study was with rheumatoid arthritis, and we had quite remarkable results in a RCT study that was published in the Journal of Rheumatology, actually. Since then, which was, I think it came out about 10 years ago, I was hoping it would have an impact on medicine in terms of people getting interested in what we were doing and applying it to not just arthritis, but other kinds of medical symptoms. And that hasn't really happened. I have been lately collaborating with some people, a guy named Jeff Rediger and a woman named Lissa Rankin, who have had an impact on helping people realize that many medical problems are related to these things. And we do hope to do some things. We have some projects in mind to have an impact on the way medicine is practiced, because most traditional medicine's designed to what I call kill the messenger rather than listen to the message. And there are ways to have clients focus on the symptom and get curious about it. And in asking questions of whatever the symptom is, not always, but sometimes there are parts related, or there are parts using the symptom to try and get a message across or punish the client for some reason. And we've had remarkable luck sometimes by simply giving those parts some airtime, working out a kind of time sharing. Most of these clients are dominated by, in the arthritis study, it was Irish Catholic mothers who were dominated by these caretaking parts that never let them take care of themselves. And when we had them focus on the pain and get curious, they heard from parts that wanted more in their lives and had been exiled. And so as we worked something out between those sets of parts, the arthritis got much, much better to the point where in some cases they went into total remission. And I've had that experience with a number of other symptoms. And it's generally either caretaking parts that are dominant and locking out others, or big achieving, striving parts that have pushed the person to obsess about work or something like that to the exclusion of other parts. So that's one level of bringing IFS to medicine. But as you, I think, implied, there are ways to help the practitioner with the parts that get triggered. These days with COVID and the pandemic, burnout is unbelievable. And there's sort of dire straits now in terms of keeping medical personnel afloat and not having them quit. And if there was a way that they knew to actually go in and work with the parts of them that are hurting so much, that would make a big difference, I think. And a way for them to stay in self in the face of all these storms they're facing. And then a way to communicate on the team with each other from this place of self. I do think that would make a difference too. I think that's what you were alluding to.
My first episode was with a guy named Dr. Scott Hall, who wrote a book on the psychological impact of medical trauma. He focused a lot in that on how modern medicine often treats it as a success when the physical is healed, which I understand that. Obviously, that's a crucial component, but that we've really got to expand that to understanding a more holistic version, and there are groups doing that. But one of those ways, kind of like we're both talking about, is like, what would it be like with these medical teams that work together or sometimes get thrown together at the last minute, whoever's on call or something, had already gone through some type of training as part of their training to understand their parts, to understand self-leadership, and even languaging for an interaction, let's say, between a physician and a nurse, or being able to understand those parts of self and have that resource, because we know so much medical mistakes, issues occur from some of those conflicts, complications, those moments when we're not in self, and it ends up having dramatic impacts for patients, for practitioners. It would be so neat if that could just be something that was part of the training.
Yeah, and helping the patient's family try to stay in self in the face of their fears and not push the patient in certain directions and be able to just be more supportive and present for the patient as they struggle.
I'm going to switch it up again a little bit. I'm very ADD as well, or ADHD. I'm kind of like that dog from the movie Up. But if we can, let me throw out a little bit on maybe some things that you miss. I mean, once you have successfully created a therapy model that has become international and researched as internal family systems, are there any things that you miss about maybe earlier in your career or that you don't get to do as much anymore?
Yeah, for better or for worse. Most of my life is still consumed with trying to run a company now and also try to collaborate on a variety of projects around continuing to bring IFS. I've been getting more and more messages from various sources that, like the people I was talking about earlier who are dominated by the striving part, I'm out of balance. And I'd spent a lot of my career. It took a lot to bring this to where it is. And I think my kids suffered for it and my first marriage. And so I am working now pretty successfully to some degree to try and bring more balance. And actually, as we speak, I'm trying to sell my house in Brookline, Massachusetts, so I can move back to where my kids live now in the Chicago area. I've got 3 daughters and there are 2 grandchildren now. So that's part of this effort to bring more balance to my life. But to answer your original question, yeah, it took a lot. And I did, I guess, sacrifice a lot of other things I could do and relationships on the path. You know, it's hard to regret all that, just in the sense that I'm really glad I brought this as far as it has come. But I do feel the need to both repair a lot of those relationships and also further repair them, because I've done some already, but also to have more balance in my life so other parts of me get nurtured too.
I really appreciate that. What it brought up in me was just thinking about, we've just had our first child 17 months ago. And in my own work, whether it be recovery from addiction or trauma that I've been through, I felt like I kind of got to a place where I stalled out. I've got a part of me that gets really busy and works really hard when it can't fix or move on. But when my son came along, what you just described is some of that feeling of there were parts I had amputated of myself that I realized if I don't start looking at not just being okay with I've amputated that piece of me, that I'm going to miss out and continue to miss out on things with him because I can't go where he is.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that, because I think sometimes it's so easy from talking with people that have risen to being as well known. I mean, I joked with some friends, I'm like, for a marriage and family therapist, getting to talk to you is like getting to talk to a celebrity. But I told myself before the interview, I was like, okay, as nervous as I am, I want to realize that probably like for most people that have risen to the level that you're at, there's the feeling of being known almost as a character, like an actor has played a character in the sense of you are Dr. Richard Schwartz, creator of internal family systems. But then also, I think people closest to you of just getting to be known as Dick. What I love about this is you're so willing to model that vulnerability when you don't have to. In a lot of the interviews I watched where you show up, and it gives a wonderful permission to people listening to just really say it's okay to be me, vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do it for that reason. I do it because I've done a lot of work with the parts of me that wanted to pretend to have it all together. And I don't want to have to live from those parts, trying to impress people all the time. And as you say, I've gotten to this status where model will do fine, even if I'm very vulnerable. So in fact, it'll do better if I am. But it feels good to not have to keep up a front all the time and just be very honest with people.
I noticed, coming back to some things that are going to be coming up for your speaking engagements, at the 2021 IFS conference, you're going to be talking with Bessel van der Kolk and Frank Anderson, right, on the benefits and pitfalls of the integration of treating complex PTSD. Would it be okay, if it's not, it's all right, but would it be okay to steal a small preview of what you're going to be bringing to that? I would love to get a small taste of that.
Bessel and I have had our debates before, and I'd say one of the more common ones is the conviction I have that self can't be damaged, and that even in people who've had horrible childhoods, you can still access it pretty quickly. Not always quickly, but it's just beneath the surface of these parts. And Bessel likes to hold up these slides of brains of severe trauma survivors where the whole prefrontal cortex is blanked out. My response is, yeah, when a dissociative part takes over, that's what you see. But that part steps back, it'll light back up. And he said, okay, go prove it. And, we've tried to raise money to do some brain scan work. We're still working on that. But that's an ongoing debate. Now, since he's become involved with the MDMA research, I think he's softened his position a little bit, because what you find with that medicine is when people take it, they immediately have this big hit of self. Their hearts are very open. They're very calm. They're interested in their inner world. And it's a big invitation for their parts to come in. And this is true with people who've had severe PTSD. Immediately, the self is there. So if it wasn't true that it's just there, that wouldn't be the case. So some of that kind of research has helped my cause, I think. But that's one of the ongoing debates.
Just on my level, with seeing clients, I have found what you have said about the self to be very true. That in cases that I'm actually very surprised as we get to opening up space for that self, despite stories that my mind would be curious, how is there something left there? And, I'm thinking of stuff like severe early attachment injury, issues with adoption, or even getting into, I had some people that wanted me to ask you a little bit about autism spectrum disorder or neurodivergent clients, but even seeing senses of self there too. I think a lot of times it's about remaining in curiosity and not boxing a client in. The other thing I had unconsciously been doing is I tend to see my parts visually, and that's not the only way. Some people don't see a visual projection of their parts. And so unconsciously I had been languaging that to my clients. And so coming back and realizing, we can open this up much more. I need to go more into that curiosity expanding.
That's great, Brian, because I'm one of those people. When I focus inside, I don't see a thing. It's like I'm doing it with the lights off. And I have a sense of them, sort of sensation-wise, and I can hear their voice, and I can tell how close I'm to them. But yeah, I don't see a thing. There was a time when I thought, how ironic that I developed this and I'm the only one who can't do it, because I had a lot of clients like you who could see it all in vivid color. And then I came to realize, no, I can do it too. I just do it differently.
So like for you, what's that experience like when you're interacting with your parts? How do they present?
Like I said, I can tell where they are in my body. Then I focus on them and I have a sense of them. And as I ask them questions, I'll hear responses. And like I said, it's like I'm doing it with the lights out.
That's really helpful for people when they're doing their parts work to know that remaining curious that the parts are there. It's learning to experience them in whatever way they present, what feels natural.
Yeah, that may be another topic between me and Bessel, because for me, it isn't the body that keeps the score. It's these parts that are stuck in the past that affect the body. And so as you focus at different places in the body, like I was talking about with the arthritis study, your body is going to respond, but it's because of these parts that are responding. And that's a kind of running debate too. You can have what we call personal burdens that came from your personal traumas that had nothing to do with your ancestors that force parts to be stuck in the past. And then there are legacy burdens that are related to things that happened in the very distant past, not during your lifetime.
Okay, are you open to a completely just nonsense question?
We'll see. Give it a try.
Okay. This one was given to me from one of my friends who went through grad school with me. So if it bombs, it's totally on him. You, Salvador Minuchin, and Max Wertheimer walk into a bar, which already feels like a terrible joke setup.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know who Max Wertheimer is.
I think he was credited, like with a lot of Gestalt or systems type thinking and stuff like that. But we can switch that one out. It's not even important for that. Why don't we pick Bessel instead? Okay, so you, Salvador Minuchin, and Bessel walk into a bar. What do you guys talk about? What song is playing on the jukebox? Who's picking up the tab? And who's taking a cab home?
Okay. I've had many conversations with Bessel in bars. And actually, we're staging our house with open houses this week, actually. And so we're going to stay in his house in Boston to stay out of our house while real estate agents are running through it. So we're very close friends, and we have a lot of the conversations that I started to talk about earlier. But if it were just a social thing, Minuchin I never got to know real well. I knew him a little bit, but he was one of my big influences, one of my big heroes. I would be a little with him the way you said you were with me.
Yeah. If I were there and you were there too and him, I would probably just be catatonic at that point, just silent and just be, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to listen.
Yeah, well, there are a few times when I met him, words couldn't come, but then a few times when I did have a little conversation with him, I never felt like he really understood IFS, even though a lot of the foundation of IFS comes from his structural family therapy. Just I brought it all into the inner world. So I would be just asking him a lot of questions about sort of similar to what you're asking me about his background and his influences, and also just letting him know how appreciative I was. And what I would really enjoy would be to watch the conversation between Minuchin and Bessel, because one of the things that Minuchin posited, which turned out not to be true, is that all you need to do is change these relationships and families in the present. You don't need to think about the past, and that spending too much time on the past gets in the way. And so he wasn't big into trauma at all. I started my career out with that assumption. And when I was initially working with clients with their parts, I would have had you maybe go to that boy inside and embrace him and form a trusting relationship in one session. Then I would assume that that was all we needed to do. I did assume that. And then I would come in next session, that boy would be hurting again and stuck in the past somewhere. And so it was just from those experiences of frustration that it wasn't really working that I learned how impactful trauma is on people's inner systems. So that would be a very interesting conversation for me to watch.
And I feel like what you just brought up, oh man, like your talk on tormentors, like these people that they trigger you, but they're really mentoring you. They're helping you to see those wounded parts that are stuck. I had one of those way back in college when a part of me that had experienced a lot of bullying got triggered. And what you just described about finding that younger boy stuck in the past, a therapist led me through that using internal family systems. And the part that really just tripped me out in a good way was when there was some switch in my mind when the experience kind of took over. And I did not feel like I was thinking what should happen next, but very much so saw it unfold. Like I went to a time when I was being bullied. Myself in that situation walked up to that younger part, and I didn't know, was he going to confront them? What was going to happen? But it's like those bullies faded away, and it was a very tender moment where I got to hold that part. I was amazed at how powerful and transformative it was, but it was weird to see it take on a life of its own.
People use the word imagination around this work, and it's not that you're imagining it. It's you're entering a very real inner world that has its own laws of physics, and you're actually surrendering the part of you that tries to imagine things and so on. And you're just going with what happens back there. And as you found, when you can do that, you wind up doing things you didn't know you were going to do. But if you're in self, it's very healing. You just automatically do the right thing.
Oh man, we could get lost in this, so I'll make this brief because there's some other things I really want to pick your mind about. But there's even that sense of how you talk about how the client's self is so much more healing than the therapist, and that the therapist, even with the best insight and intuition, cannot be as accurate as the self. And I found that to be so true, that my job is to not get in the way of my client's self, but to empower that, to help open that up for them, to let that take over. And it's such a freeing thing. It's less burden on me with working with clients. And so I found what you've said about that to be very true. And going back to your earlier point, though, I also wanted to make sure this was something that you would agree with, that I feel like I've seen But kind of like with structural family therapy or other family therapies that focus on change in the external world, which matters, I found a lot of my clients did not find relief until the internal world also was explored and healed. It's like the external could have healed, but they couldn't feel it almost.
That's right. And that's how I got into IFS, because I graduated from my PhD program at Purdue in Maryland Family Therapy, thinking that I'd found the Holy Grail and that was all we needed to do. And I made the mistake, I guess, of testing that assumption by doing an outcome study and finding just what you said, that we could reorganize the families just the way the book said to, and didn't really do the job for my clients. And then asking why, they started to teach me IFS. And I'm still a family therapist. I still believe that you need to work with external systems, but most of the time, that won't do the whole job.
Couple more ridiculous questions if you're ready to take them on.
I'll let you know if I'm not. So.
I know. I'm thinking at some point you're just kind of like, is he really going to ask me these questions? But I wanted to see if I could get to that different view. So I guess I got to know, if a zombie apocalypse was to occur, how long do you think you'd last?
I'm old and weak, so I don't think I'd last very long.
You think it'd be quick?
I think I'd be one of the first to go, although my wife is considerably younger and is very strong, so I think she might protect me.
Well, I feel like there would be really big need for internal family systems in a zombie apocalypse. Talk about like a living trauma. That's one last ridiculous one here. With the internal family systems Wikipedia page, have you ever looked that up and read anything on the internal family systems Wikipedia page before?
I haven't contributed myself, and I haven't looked at it in a long time. When it first came out, I looked at it and was discouraged to notice that it talked about IFS, but it didn't mention my name.
Yeah, it left out minor details.
And then I found out who wrote it and bugged him until he did put my name in there.
That's really funny. Yeah. Hey, by the way, you might want to put, the creator in there just somewhere, footnote, some small reference to me. Okay. Well, I'm going to give you a few lightning round questions. One of my previous guests, actually, Crystal Mazzola, who specializes in recovery from codependency, she wanted to know what part of self you often see maybe having codependency as a tool that it's using to protect the system or to protect the self, or maybe distance itself from an exiled feeling. And what you usually do with a part that maybe is, like she specifically mentioned, the aspect of codependency where there's a lot of self-sacrifice in hopes that people will value you in that and meet your needs, but inevitably just leads to that disappointment of not being able to codependent enough, so to speak.
What's called codependency often involves several different parts. And one of them is that big caretaking part that feels like you have to take care of everybody. And if you don't always take care of people, then you're a bad person or you're going to lose these people. And then a part that kind of feels too much for the person that's being codependent for and can't stand that person to suffer in any way. So then has to do something to fix that, and some other kinds of parts. But in general, I'm going to help that person find those parts, do the work with those parts, and realize where they're stuck in the past, because a lot of times it's a combination of just these legacy burdens of patriarchy, and that's the role of a good mother, or they just carry those kinds of burdens. And then sometimes they're stuck in scenes where their value was only, and their family was only there if they took care of people all the time. And then sometimes in scenes where their parent suffered a great deal and they couldn't stand it. And there's conflict avoidant elements to it too. So it's a complicated topic.
I think that helps a lot, though, of like understanding you've got to approach it from multiple areas, understanding when that part maybe originated with those behaviors, what part it came to be helpful to at some time, and maybe how to catch it up to present day. But yeah, like you said, a lot of different approaches can be very complicated.
And to find those parts, it's pretty simple, because all you have to do is ask the person, when you know you should set a boundary, what happens inside of you that makes it so you don't? Answering that question, you'll find these parts I'm talking about.
Another one I wanted to throw out to you as well is, I know it's a bigger topic, but can you tell us a little bit about the laws of inner physics? Just a quick recap there.
Right. As I started exploring these inner systems across people, it became clear there were things you could do in there and there were things that you couldn't do. Because if it was just imagination, you could do most anything. As I studied all that, that's part of how I became convinced that these are real inner worlds. And they have their own laws about what's possible and what's not that aren't the same as in this world. And so over time, I just started to try to identify those laws and wrote about all that in my second edition of the original book, Internal Family Systems Therapy. So there's a whole list of these laws of inner physics.
It's not just imagination. There are real rules, real experiences. And just like we talked about earlier, how it takes on its own life. It's not something you're just saying, well, I think I want this to happen next, but that the parts respond with their own needs, motives, that the self has that intuition of knowing what to do, that this isn't something that you can just go in there and break any rules. With a family system, you couldn't. You'd have to know what are the unspoken rules, what can you do, what can you not do. So yeah, I think that's a crucial concept. Another one that jumped out to me here is getting to know you a little bit more. Do you have any favorite movies you like to watch, TV shows? Do you ever read fiction, anything like that?
I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't read much fiction in quite some time, partly because I'm so consumed with just trying to stay on top of everything with IFS. One of my, firefighters is to watch certain kinds of TV, which I still watch episodes of The Office frequently, even though I've seen it.
Makes me so happy inside. That might have made my day. I did not know you were a fan of The Office.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic show. I watched some of those kinds of shows. There are now such a variety of things. And so that's our chill out time in the evenings, is often to pick one really good show that we can follow for a while.
Well, what about you? Do you have a question for me? Let me throw that out to you. And it's okay if you don't, but just wanted to give you that opportunity if you had anything you'd want to ask me.
Let's see. Do you have a particular angle on IFS, or do you come with a background to it that's maybe unusual?
That's a really great question. I think originally, I feel like I tried to approach it with my manager in a very fix-it, analytical way. And it was actually helpful in my own growth as I learned more about being in self, to kind of see that detective mechanic part of me and where he came from, and that there are great uses that he could have and ways that he can help. But there's also this heavy pressure and burden that I find. So a lot of times I've noticed is when that comes up in the room, for me, it's about getting back to that sense of self and trying to be present with saying, I don't have to fix.
That's right.
That's okay. I can be with. The biggest thing that I wouldn't say that I've accomplished, but would be very curious about, is I would love to lean more into kind of what this podcast is about and what we talked about earlier, which is finding ways to share IFS and implement it in a way that healthcare teams and patient care, that it could be realized there. And that's why I was curious if there's already somebody doing that. If you're familiar with Atul Gawande's book, Better.
No.
He's a physician that talks about the dramatic benefits in healthcare just that came from having checklists and also from a team-based approach instead of kind of the lone cowboy physician that's going to solve it all, that it's just medicine's too complex at this point. And so I thought about, man, what if there was something like an IFS checklist for a healthcare team, or an IFS team building intensive that they went through, or some of those issues. So yeah, I think that's a little passion of like how I'd love to see it adapted. But those are lofty things. I think first I want to make it through all of your trainings and everything before I start trying to do that. But it's something that I have found, again, what you said so true, is listening to my clients, especially when a client triggers a part of me where I feel protective, or I feel feelings of wanting to distance myself from that client, of realizing, okay, this is a very important moment. And I'll borrow a little bit from like Kristen Neff with self-compassion work. That's been really helpful for, again, that mechanic fix-it part of me that struggles with needing to fix it. Instead, it's just recognizing it's a moment of suffering. Suffering's part of life, and I want to be kind to myself in this moment. Those 3 sentences from her really help a lot integrating with IFS and that, which goes back to the concepts of the self anyways. It's just kind of that helpful tool, get me back into that.
It's a way to get there.
Yeah, that's a great question, though. This has been hugely helpful. And I loved getting to know you and getting to know the man behind Internal Family Systems and hopes you have moving forward with your work, but also with your personal goals and things in your life. That's wonderful to hear. I'm looking through here just to make sure there wasn't any big ones that I missed. I think I wanted to know, maybe in closing, what you would think about with some of the advancements we've seen in pharmacology, in things like virtual or augmented reality, or in neuroscience, especially with partnering internal family systems, like with ketamine treatments or with MDMA or things like that. Where do you think our field's going to be in 50 years?
Yeah, I do think the psychedelic revolution is going to have a big impact. And I'm trying my best to have IFS become at least one of the maps to that territory, because I think it's very useful for the guides, facilitators to have that map. And I also kind of fear that what's happened in medicine, which is to start to put everything on the drug as the answer, could happen with psychedelics too, because psychedelics, for me, is a tool because it, in different ways, accesses a lot of self. When you access a lot of self, you can do some healing things that you couldn't do before in an ordinary session. And that can be very helpful and complementary. But the medicine isn't the answer. It's just the answer is to heal these parts. And it's a way to facilitate that.
I would agree. One way or another, I think it would lean towards that, just because I think sometimes maybe medication, while a very helpful tool, if used only and there's no desire to work on that inner system, is really just another protector in a sense. I mean, I feel like you could use medication or therapy or different things to just kind of distance yourself from that exile.
Yeah. You probably heard the term spiritual bypass, where there's a medical bypass, pharmacological bypass as well. And too often that's what we're doing.
Well, Dick, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your insights into these things. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you on the show, and looking forward to hearing more from you guys and checking out y'all's website, the many different resources, the books and everything. We'll put links below for anybody who's curious about that. But again, thank you so much, Dick.
I really appreciate your enthusiasm and coming up with these questions. It was interesting, and your passion to support IFS. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to The Lucky Exile with Brenton Kirschner. We're so glad you've joined us. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching The Lucky Exile. To learn more about Brenton, his practice, and ways integrative healthcare can help you or a loved one, visit BrentonKirschner.com. We encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. Until next time, be well.